number 1218. In her heyday, 1218 would log 7,500 miles a month, 12 months a year. Restored for excursion service, her schedule today is less demanding. But in her triumphant return to Roanoke, she relives the glorious memory of one of the fastest and most powerful locomotives of all time, the N&W Class A's. Her mission was not only coal. On return trips, she was often called upon to move 6,000-ton fast merchandise trains from Portsmouth, Ohio, at speeds up to 70 miles per hour. In between coal trains during World War II, the Class A's would move entire tank divisions with up to 80 cars, boxcars for equipment, sleeping cars for troops, and flat cars for tanks. The design for the A had been carefully thought out by N&W Chief Mechanical Officer John Pilcher and his staff. The A would be the maximum size allowed by rail curvature and clearances. 70-inch drivers were used to avoid counterbalance problems. A large boiler with 6 driving axles would give the locomotive maximum power and speed. The firebox was put behind the drivers to lower the profile and improve combustion characteristics. Originally designed for 275 pounds per square inch of pressure, the boilers, the largest and heaviest on the Norfolk and Western, were later raised to 300 pounds of pressure. The Class A was also the first locomotive with roller bearings on all axles. 43 A's in all would be built between 1936 and 1950. To improve maximum availability, ease and speed of service were also important design parameters. With this Class A in the engine shed, a yard goat pushes the locomotive's auxiliary water bottle in for periodic servicing. Serviced, watered, and washed, she is ready for her next assignment. Here an A takes a high-speed mixed merchandise train up the Virginia mountains. A single A could haul over 3,600 tons up these grades. On level track, it was possible to pull 7,500 tons at 64 miles per hour. Crossing the Ohio River Valley at 42 miles per hour with 175 empty coal cars, this A meets her fully loaded sister headed to Portsmouth. After 25 years of dedicated service, it would be 36 more years before Class A number 1218 would again grace the Norfolk and Western rails. The decision was made to move 1218 from the Roanoke Transportation Museum to the Birmingham Steam Shops in May of 1985 and begin her rebuilding. All the appliances, grates, and rocker mechanisms would be removed and rebuilt or recast. Cracks in the front engine frame would have to be repaired by contract welders. Stripped to the naked boiler, parts are revealed that had not been seen since she was built. New tubes, flues, and superheater elements have to be built. With the internal elements rebuilt and repaired, the boiler is now ready for reassembly. Driving boxes are remachined and new running gear brasses are made. The drivers have been carefully removed, one set at a time. They are lifted by the shop crane and moved to the wheel lathe. The drivers can then be turned to meet precise wheel specifications. All four crossheads and crosshead guides have been removed and rebuilt to their original precision specifications. The original A's were designed using alligator-type crosshead guides. New delivery pipes to the rear cylinders are cast and fitted. During 1218's stint as an auxiliary boiler at Union Carbide in the 60s, she had been refitted for liquid fuel. The tender from C&O's 614 is modified for use as an auxiliary water bottle. Southern's big wrecker is called in to carefully lift the massive boiler off the supporting blocks so that the front engine can be replaced. This will be the biggest and heaviest part of the rebuilding process. In other parts of the shop, Southern's steam machinists are busy fabricating a new drawbar pin and several hundred grease fittings. With the boiler properly elevated, the front frame and drivers are pushed into position by a diesel switcher. Finally, the heavy supporting blocks are removed. Preparations are made for installing the front engine. Wood shims are used to adjust the height of the front drivers for proper fitting to the rear engine. As with any job of this magnitude, unforeseen problems arise. As the engine is eased onto the shims, the drivers on the number 2 axle slip out of their prepared alignment. The drivers will have to be repositioned with great difficulty. At last, the engine is properly aligned and can be slipped into place. The rebuilt trailing truck has already been installed. With all major assemblies in position, 1218 is ready for boiler lagging and additional sheet metal work. The new pride of the N&W will be painted and rolled out of the shop to begin her new life.
Hi, I'm Doug Karn, Master Mechanic Steam for Norfolk Southern Corporation, and this is our new locomotive, N&W 1218 Class A, that we've just finished rebuilding here at Norfolk Southern shop. I'd like to take you on a short tour around the locomotive and show you a few of the operating parts. This is one of the main cylinders of the locomotive. It transmits the power from the energy of the steam to mechanical energy to turn the wheels. It's 26 inches by 30 inches in dimensions. The force is transmitted back through the main crosshead here, then into the main rod, back to the main crank pin. Force is then transmitted to each of the driving wheels by way of the side rods. This is one of the locomotive's 2 steam-driven air compressors. It generates compressed air utilizing boiler steam for the air brakes on the locomotive and for the train. This is one of the 4 mechanical lubricators on the locomotive. Each one of these lubricators supplies oil to approximately 20 different locations, thereby ensuring that all parts of the locomotive are lubricated and can run free. This is the power reverse cylinder of the locomotive. It enables the engineer with very little effort to move these heavy valve gear parts, thereby reversing the locomotive or placing it in any cutoff that he would happen to select. This is the second set of cylinders on this locomotive. The function of the parts are much the same as the front set. We have a crosshead, a main rod, main crank pin, and side rods to transmit the power from the boiler. This is the injector, one of the 2 devices on the locomotive for supplying the boiler with water. It utilizes steam and sucks water from the tender, forcing it through a series of nozzles and jets into the boiler. The rear portion of the locomotive boiler is the firebox. Inside of this area here is where the coal is burned to make the heat to generate the steam. The lower portion of this is the ash pan, where all the ashes and cinders collect after the coal is burned.
The reborn 1218 can now be rechristened.
I want to say this is the finest steam engine ever built, anywhere, anytime. Now that doesn't take anything away from the 611, which is the finest passenger steam engine ever built. Right. But this is a freight and passenger engine. I think it's the most powerful engine running in the world today. It's certainly the most powerful engine that's ever been restored to service. I'm tremendously proud of the people that made this possible here in Birmingham. Without them, it would not have happened. I'm glad to have had a part in it, taking it out of the Ronald Park and bringing it back to life. It was great pleasure that I christened the 1218, rechristen it, and it wouldn't be fair to call it anything but the 1218 because that's what it is. The world's most powerful and the best steam engine ever built. So I christen these 1218. Are you ready? Well, we did it.
On the morning of April 22nd, 1218 will begin her 3-day journey back to her homecoming in Roanoke. With 300 pounds of steam pressure in her boiler, 1218 departs Leeds. En route to Atlanta, the number 1 crank pin bearing seizes in the rod. The side rod will have to be disconnected, the Union link and crosshead pin dropped, and the rod brass removed. It will be taken back to Irondale and returned in the early hours of the next morning. During the lull, we take a tour of the fireman's side of 1218's cab.
My name is Dwight Browning. I'm one of 2 firemen assigned to fire the steam locomotive number 1218 from the N&W this year. I'm going to try and give you a little rundown on the controls, gauges, and valves, show you a little bit about what a fireman has to do on this large engine. All right, besides the water gauge glass away to the right over here, that fireman's got about 4 separate gauges to keep his eyes on. One up here in the left top corner is the steam heat gauge. We use that in the wintertime primarily to show how much steam heat's going back to the car. To the right, we have a feed water pump indicator. This primarily tells you if your feed water pump's running while you're going down the road. You can't really tell how much is being put in except by the pressure. The next gauge down to the left is the main steam pressure. 600-pound gauge, 300 pounds once the safety valve goes off that. And to the right here, we have a duplex stoker gauge. It's got two separate needles, one for the blast jets and one for the stoker engine. Once you find your blast jet setting, just leave it there. And then your other needle, the red one there, is stoker engine. It'll vary quite a bit depending on what size coal you're crunching up to put in the firebox. And the stoker jet, you can vary it depending on size of coal also. But as far as valves go on this engine, the fireman has to watch after a handful, as you can see. Up here to the right, this one controls the feed water pump when you're running down the road. Regulate how much water is put in the boiler, as opposed to the engineer having an injector. Next valve we have down used quite a bit is the blower valve that creates an artificial draft on the fire when you're drifting and such. You use the blower. When you're working the engine real hard, you don't need it. You can turn it off or almost all the way off, just enough to keep smoke out of the cab. The next valve we have coming down, we don't use it too much. It's a grate shaker valve. It corresponds with these little levers down here. You need steam-powered grates. You can't operate them by turning the steam onto this mechanism. Depends on how bad of a coal you get. If you have big problems with your coal blinker and you need help, the steam grate shaker is a great way to shake your fire out. The next two primary valves we use quite a bit, stoker blast jets and the stoker engine. We demonstrated earlier. This is what controls how far the coal is blasted into the firebox, and this controls the amount of coal coming up the stoker auger into the firebox. So depending on how the engineer is running the engine, use these two valves quite a bit. But down below, this assembly down here controls steam to the firing jets, each individual one, and one main in the middle for a cutoff. Once you set these, you don't hardly ever have to mess with them.
With 1218 back on schedule, a new fire is built up and the journey continues. Pulling out from the siding at Taylor, 1218 crosses out onto the main under a set of green signals. With power to spare, 1218 charges past the site of the famous Civil War Battle of Cowpens in North Carolina. After spending the night at Salisbury, 1218 prepares for the early morning departure. Departing Reedsville, the air is filled with a sound not heard in this area for decades: the wailing of a steam whistle. At last, the glory of steam returns to conquer the Blue Ridge. Built for much heavier tasks, 1218 effortlessly eases through the curves and up the grade. Washed and filled with water, coal, and sand, 1218 is rotated on the turntable at Schaefer's Crossing. Today, she will be hauling a special 25-car passenger consist. The A's were designed as flatland speedsters, running at up to 70 miles per hour and capable of 6,300 horsepower at 45 miles per hour. This magnificent locomotive stands 16 feet high and almost 122 feet long. Her total weight is in excess of 1 million pounds. Although rated at 114,000 pounds of tractive effort, her actual tractive power approaches 124,000 pounds. With Frank Collins at the throttle, 1218 prepares to pick up over 1,000 passengers on excursion service for the 1987 NRHS National Convention in Roanoke. She is eased into the yard to couple on time for her scheduled 8 a.m. departure. "1218 passes Shawsville as she marches up the grade of Christiansburg Mountain. On July 30th, 1218, pretenders, and 25 passenger cars enter Pembroke Tunnel on the 102-mile run to Bluefield, West Virginia. At the east end of Bluefield Yard, a rare and historic event takes place. With alternating whistles, engine 611 and 1218 hoot out a greeting. At Bluefield, it is evident how 1218's articulation helps her negotiate the sharp track curvature. She will be turned on the Y for the return trip to Roanoke. Her huge 70-inch drivers will turn 290 revolutions for each mile of track. On the return trip, the passenger consist has been given to 611, and 1218 returns to the job for which she was built. 1218 passes through Lurien with 18 fully loaded coal cars and a caboose. Storming past the Sand Tower at Vickers, 1218 will climb the west side of Christiansburg Mountain. At Salem the next day, the railroad was to present a unique and historic event. Norfolk Southern has cleared both mains west of Roanoke to allow 611 and 1218 to pace each other in a thunderous run-by. Rail fans would witness a harmony of steam engines not seen or heard in generations. At Shawsville, engine 1218 runs solo again. The extra water bottle has been removed from 611 and placed behind 1218's tender. With 2 tenders and a 50-car string of empty coal hoppers, this scene could easily be out of 1218's past, 30 years ago. Later, on the morning of August 1st, 611 with her 25 passenger cars again catches up with 1218 and leads the A around the curve at Montgomery. Rolling down Christiansburg Mountain, both locomotives ease toward Radford, where they will be coupled up for an exciting day of double heading. 1218 slowly backs up to be joined with 611. This is the first double heading since rebuilding, and perhaps, for these two engines, the first time ever.
5 feet.
After leaving Radford, the first major doubleheader for the N&W in decades heads back east up the western slope of Christiansburg Mountain. The train has stopped briefly to unload its passengers for a photo run-by. Hundreds of avid steam fans will watch and photograph this extraordinary event from locations all along the track. After the photo run-by, with her exhaust out of sync, 1218 gets a gentle push from 611 to begin her march up the hill. the next day's runs, the two locomotives switch positions and head east up the Blue Ridge. With 611 on the point, the world's most powerful 484 is aided by the most powerful articulated steam locomotive in existence today. It is an effortless run with a light consist of 25 passenger cars. The train has been split up at Lynchburg, and 611 will soon head back to Birmingham for her 5-year mandatory boiler inspection. 1218 will continue back to Roanoke. In late September, 1218 begins her next series of excursions. Road foreman Bob Saxton has replaced the recently retired Frank Collins as engineer for locomotive 1218.
I'm Bob Saxton. I'm road foreman of engines and steam for Norfolk Southern Corporation. I'll give you a quick rundown on what the different things are in the cab of the 1218. Well, the first thing you do when you get on the engine is check the water level, make sure you have waters, and basically just make sure you got water in the glass. Right now we have about a half a glass of water. Then you check your boiler pressure, make sure you got enough steam to do anything you might have to do to get ready. Right now we're 285 pounds of steam. Then you check your air pressure. Here you have your main reservoir and equalizing reservoir, brake pipe, and brake cylinder. You want to make sure you have 130, 140 pounds of brake or main reservoir. You want to make sure your brake pipe's up when your brakes are in release. And we're carrying 100 pounds of train line on this passenger train. And you make sure your brake cylinder on the locomotive is applied so you know the engine won't move on you. And this is the throttle. You'd pull this out to admit steam to the cylinders to get the engine to move. And this is the reverse gear. Before you'd move, you'd put this in forward. And that would set the valves up for forward motion. And then you'd open the throttle and pull out after you release the brakes. All right, this is the brake stand here. We have a 26L automatic brake system, and this is the automatic brake valve or the train brake. This is the independent or engine brake, and you would use this one to control the train. When you would move this over here to the right, you would make a reduction in the brake pipe, putting the brakes on the cars. And then you would use this brake valve to bail it off the engine. You don't want those to apply because in a steam locomotive you'll heat the tires up from the friction of the brake shoes and cause the tires to slip. And it also keeps the slack stretched out on the train. All right, the locomotive is equipped with 2 feed water systems. The fireman uses the water pump on this locomotive, and the engineer has an injector. It's a Nathan 4000 injector. And this is the operating lever here for it, and it's in the closed position now. You draw it up to the teeth here, which would be priming, and then to close it, you just simply turn it off.
1218 will begin her journey out of the yard in Ludlow, Kentucky. In the early morning hours, this massive Class A locomotive exhausts a huge plume of steam and smoke as it builds speed for today's trip south into the heart of Kentucky bluegrass country. At Bergen, we join the engineer and fireman for a thrilling ride in the cab of the mighty 1218. At Danville, 1218 thunders through the rolling countryside of Kentucky, new territory for a Class A locomotive. With a full consist, a Class A locomotive would burn 7 tons of coal and evaporate almost 15,000 gallons of water per hour. With a 30-ton tender and an auxiliary water bottle, these engines could run non-stop for over 4 hours. The sound of steam echoes throughout the valley as 1218 crosses High Bridge to the north bank of the Kentucky River. With every appliance and mechanical part working perfectly, 1218's excursion through Kentucky is a tribute to the mechanics and machinists in the Birmingham steam shops that made these trips possible. Holding to the speed limit imposed by Norfolk Southern, Engine 1218 and her passenger tour through the beautiful autumn colors of the central Kentucky countryside. On the original routes, the A's would only be seen operating in Ohio and the Virginias.